Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. This is the Jeff Bradbury Show, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking to a producer of amazing educational content. And if you have ever checked out some of the most popular things on YouTube and on Spotify for your students, he probably has had his hand in creating it. I want to bring on today somebody who has not only been Emmy nominated, but also has created some pretty interesting Star Wars content. We'll talk about that at the end of this interview. I want to bring on today my good friend, Mr. Jerry Culber. Jerry, how are you today? Welcome to TeacherCast.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I'm great. Great to see you.
It is so great to have you here. What an honor to have you on here. Thank you so much for your time. Let's just get started. How are the holidays for you?
Awesome so far. We're going to go up to some family upstate New York, and then got some fun plans for New Year's Eve back in New York City. So feeling pretty good.
Things have been great here as we're getting started. We've got a lot of triplets and stuff coming in, and the holiday season's over here. They're getting excited. They're building things, and they are into basically the same stuff that we're going to be talking today. Education, educational content. They're getting into podcasting just like Dad here. Talk to us a little bit about your life. You have had a fantastic career. Reading down everything that you've been getting into, it seems like everything that my kids are interested in, you've had a hand in creating. So first of all, I want to say as a dad, thank you for all the great work that you're doing. But you've been through an awful lot. How did Jerry get started with everything?
So I got started when I was a kid. I was really into just making shows. I would do magic shows. I would put on little shows, and I also was always really into science. Those are kind of my two hobbies outside of school. And when I went to NYU to study theater, I went and worked in theater for a couple of years afterwards, and eventually got offered a job working in television for Dick Wolf, who does Law and Order, and that just kind of led to this sort of journey through the world of television that I went on for 20 something years. And along the way, I was just always excited about the idea of figuring out how to take what I knew about theater and television and use it to create something that was educational, not just entertaining. And I finally got that opportunity about 15 years ago when I was working for National Geographic. And I just haven't looked back. We did this show Brain Games, and it was so much fun, and it was so successful, and it was so impactful that it just became very clear to us that was a way we could actually make entertainment, that it could be educational and fun for the whole family. And so from that point forward, that's the only thing that's really interesting to me.
Well, that's the one thing I've noticed about all the content that you've created with your team. It's not necessarily for kids, and it's not necessarily for adults. You have found that secret sauce that is going to be entertaining and edutaining for everybody in the family. I can sit down with my 11-year-olds and check out all of these things, from your TV stuff to your podcasts. What is that secret sauce? What makes quality edutainment?
Wow. Are we doing this? You want me to reveal all the secret sauce?
We're recording.
All right, let's do it. Okay. So first of all, we know there's a lot of great children's entertainment out there that parents cannot stand to listen to, right? And by great, I mean the kids love it. They learn from it. But it's just not something that you want to, that you want to listen to as an adult. And so it wasn't so much that we were like, well, let's just not do that. But what we realized was that those kind of shows are missing an opportunity, which we call the connection, the co-viewing, the spark of curiosity that can happen when you're able to watch something with your kid and enjoy it, or listen to something like Who Smarted with your kid, enjoy it, and then have a conversation afterwards and keep that idea going and keep the curiosity going. Now you're having a conversation, you're building critical thinking skills, you're bonding with your kid. And so that was the impetus for us to think about how to make shows that parents would want to listen to with their kids, or conversely, shows for adults that kids would want to watch, like Brain Games. And so when we write these shows, we're always thinking about what is relatable to everybody. If it's a show for adults that we want kids to watch also, we'll tend to think, if you want to get a little in the weeds on it, we'll tend to think of writing the stories and the tone of it as something around an 8th or 9th grade comprehension level, because we know that that's a great place to be for busy adults who are trying to do a million things and watch our show. That's about the level of attention you have. And it's just high enough that a kid, a kid in 6th grade or 5th grade, they can understand it. It's a stretch, but they feel like they're being given an opportunity to be treated as an adult, right? To listen to something that's a little older. And so that's kind of the sweet spot for us, is just finding this level of tone and level of storytelling that both kids and adults can get excited about.
I'm curious to know if that has changed since the COVID generation has taken over, right? In other words, are you noticing that what happened or what worked 10 years ago is still working now? Is the formula changed a little bit, or have you had to tweak things since we're now talking to a 6th through 8th grade generation who was homeschooled on the computer?
Yeah. It's funny. It has changed a little, but not a lot, because for us, we're not a company that sort of chases trends. We're just chasing great storytelling and fun and making it fun. And so that formula doesn't really change based on how the kids were raised. It's maybe maybe our shows are a little bit faster. Maybe they're a little bit shorter because attention spans, but the core of it is for us, it's always the great storytelling and fun, and humor just always works.
You've mentioned the term storytelling a few times here. I want to jump into a conversation that we had before we hit the recording. You started in theater, and then you moved to television. Is that where you got this concept of storytelling first? And if so, what does make a good story that lasts so that way parents and students can have those conversations?
I think I was always drawn to storytelling. I was reading at a young age. I was always writing. The storytelling, I will say, so I made a lot of reality television from like early 2000s. I worked on the original Queer Eye for the Straight Guy back in 2002, and then I worked on a bunch of random reality shows for years. And what I realized from those shows was you have to be able to walk into a room with people who there's no script, there's no character, and you have to figure out how to create story that's relatable. And from that experience working on those shows, I think that's where I really started to hone my ability to make something like, neuroscience or space or learning about the human body. That's where I started to learn how to make those kind of topics really fun and relatable. Was from all that work I did on reality television. So I think that was a big part of the evolution for me.
As far as making those stories, do you find any transition between theater, television, and now the success that you're having in the podcasting medium? It's still all storytelling, but are you finding that there's any similarities, or are they just three separate medium?
No, they're so similar. That's the thing. Like great story. I mean, if you go back to like great story structure, go back to the Greek theories about story, it still works. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, right? So Act 1, there's a new a journey. There's someone you're meeting. There's some challenge they're facing. Act 2, they go into the dark forest and face the challenge, or into the cave and they, face the enemy or whatever's in there. And then in Act 3, they return home with new knowledge and the world has changed, right? That's your basic story structure. And then if within that you can create great characters that feel relatable and fun or funny, or like someone you'd want to hang out with, or someone you want to root for, or someone you want to root against, you've got all the ingredients for great storytelling. That's true in theater, it's film, television. We hear our podcast, Who Smarted and Mysteries About True Histories. People tell us all the time they feel like when they're listening to those shows, they feel like they're watching a TV show without pictures, basically. And so that's a great compliment for us, because it means that the level of storytelling we're doing is at that level. And so I think that's, there is a lot of similarity. It's just, are there pictures? Are there not? Are there live actors? Are there not? But great storytelling is great storytelling.
I completely agree. And over the last, many years here, working with teachers, working with podcasters, working with teachers who have aspirations to be podcasters, I keep saying it's a lesson plan. Like every time you put on a show, it is, who is the hero? What is the hero trying to do? How are they getting through their struggles? And what is that resolution to it? Doesn't matter for me if I'm having an interview with somebody or teaching middle school or working in a PD session with a bunch of adults. It is that story. How are you going to introduce something and get them through the content? I'm curious, growing up, what were some of your favorite stories?
Oof, that's a good question. So I was actually really heavily into mysteries. Like I loved the Hardy Boys books. I loved the Encyclopedia Brown. My absolute favorite story as a kid was an Ellen Raskin book called The Westing Game. That I just I could read that now and still love it. I loved anything kind of science fiction. Asimov was very big for me. But my favorite thing was Choose Your Own Adventure books. I love. I don't know if you remember those, but
yes, I do.
Yeah, they were like books for people who don't remember them or too young. There were books where you had to make choices every couple of pages, and it would tell you go to the next page. And I think from that, I really just started to understand the way that stories can branch. I didn't know that at the time, but in retrospect, that taught me a lot about like how stories can change and still get you through the 3 acts of storytelling.
I'm always curious about how, again, thinking that this is a lesson, this is a podcast, how long do things last, especially where, like currently I'm teaching middle school and our periods are 45, 55 minutes, something in that. The attention span that you have to put together. Yeah. Some of my lessons are 45 minutes. Some of my lessons are 3 different stories in the middle because I know their attention spans are going. When you're thinking about putting together a show, whether it be visual or audio, where do you find that sweet spot when it comes to keeping people's attention, grasping people's attention? I'm sure you're thinking of the science saying we have to get from the first to the second act within 8 to 12 minutes, or, how do you scientifically put together that piece of content? And is it different between video and audio?
Yeah. So it is a little bit different because with audio, there is a little bit heavier cognitive load for people, because especially with our, like Who Smarted, because it's a narrative scripted show and we're taking them on journeys through history and they're learning lots of stuff. But because there's no visual, they are actually having to like picture it and imagine it. And so we know that there is there's sort of a limit, both in terms of, the attention span for that. And then there's also, we've just found from doing, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes of this kind of programming over the last 15 years, we've discovered sort of an intuitive sense of how much information you can give somebody during an episode before they're like, enough information, thank you. And that kind of depends on the show and the format. But I will say that we found with Brain Games and Brain Child, which we did on Netflix, you get about 2 or 3 minutes per topic, and then you got to move on, because you're delivering, pretty intense amounts of information, and that's like 2 or 3 minutes of that, and then move on to the next topic. You may not notice it as a viewer. Like we shift sometimes using, music, or a graphic comes up, and then we kind of reset your mind. But we were able to work with a lot of psychologists when we started designing these shows to understand how the human brain processes information, how story encodes information differently. And so all of that work kind of gets baked into our shows. And so, yeah, we're always kind of checking to see, like, is the length right? Are we tuning out? Or people telling us things are too long or too short? But you kind of just get a sixth sense for it,
Where do you find the sweet spot is as far as time and length? I mean, even here, people always ask, well, how long are your shows? And I try to go like 20 minutes, 45 minutes, because that's about the length of time somebody's driving to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
For you, you're looking at 8th graders. You're looking at 5th graders. Like, where do you find that sweet spot? I mean, obviously the analytics will tell you when people are finding things and dropping off and stuff. Where is kids' content these days?
So for the 7 to 10-year-olds that are the sweet spot for Who Smarted and Mysteries About True Histories, it's around 15 minutes. That's the length that really works. It's long enough to really explore a topic and take them on a journey, but short enough that they're not going to get bored. We did one show for small kids, for like 3 to 5-year-olds, called Deep Blue Sea. That was for Spotify. It was an audio show all about fish in the ocean. And that show was much shorter because those children at that age have a shorter attention span. So for us, our sweet spot, the 8, 9, 10-year-olds, it's about 15 minutes per episode.
Where do you come up?
Sorry, I was going to say adults can be longer, obviously, but
where do you come up with all your topics?
So initially it was just myself, my co-creator, co-producer, partner in all things, Adam Tex Davis. And then we brought on a few more people for Who Smarted. And then when Who Smarted sort of survived the pandemic and just started growing and becoming this huge show, we ended up bringing on quite a team of writers and researchers. And now, honestly, the show is such a big audience of kids that are constantly giving suggestions. We often do episodes based on suggestions from children. We did one about visually impaired people that one of our listeners who's visually impaired suggested. We just did an episode of Who Smarted on autism that an autistic a child who listens to the show suggested. So we'll take suggestions from listeners and do shows that way as well.
That is awesome that you're taking that feedback and turning it around and being able to entertain, edutain, whatever the right words are here. But you really are educating, your students, no matter where they are, whether they be in the car, whether they be listening at home with mom and dad, what do you hope that students take away from your programs, no matter if it is that audio or video or TV, whatever?
So we always say, people are like, wow, you teach people so much about the world. And we're like, we don't teach about the world. We give you information, but really what we're doing is we're using entertainment and fun to just inspire a lifelong love of curiosity and learning. And so what we want people to take away from our shows is that learning, even around difficult topics, can be fun. It can be funny. It can be enjoyable. It doesn't have to be serious and heavy. And that came from my own experience as a student in high school, where I had really good teachers, but the way the material was taught was so dry that my brain didn't connect with it. And so if I'm able to, help a kid who would be curious, who might not be connecting with the material in school, find a way in because we made it fun, or if a teacher is able to use an episode of our show before a difficult topic that they're teaching and it gets the kids' minds primed and fun and they're thinking and leaning in, that's a huge win for us. So that's what we hope people take away.
Same question, but parents. What do you hope that parents take away knowing that their students or their kids are listening to outstanding educational programming?
Yeah, parents, it's a little different. With parents, we really hope that what we're helping them do is connect with their kids around these kind of topics, around the curiosity, whether it's space or the human body or all of these things that, one of the challenges, of being a parent is your kids are always going, why? And at some point, a lot of parents are like, enough with the whys. We're trying to make it so you never have to say enough with the whys. You want to know why? See if there's an episode of Who Smarted, right? Or if you want to know why, let's research it later, right? Let's develop our critical thinking skills. So we're trying to make it easier for parents to engage with their kids around stuff that they may not have the answers to, but at least they're able to have a conversation and connect and learn together. So that's what we really want parents to be able to take away. We hear from parents all the time that they love being able to play this Who Smarted in the car or at bedtime and give their kids something that's fun for the kid, and the parent gets to feel no guilt because it's educational and there's no screen. So
I completely echo that. My wife is always driving the triplets around and they're listening to, your shows. They're also listening to like Greek myths and stuff like that. There's always things out there, but between like my house and the daycare, as you mentioned, 15, 20 minutes of driving, they get a show and a half in, and it's not listening to their random YouTube videos where you don't know what it is. It is kid friendly. I want to bring up something that you mentioned earlier, your high school days. Was there a teacher or set of teachers that really inspired you to move in these directions?
Yeah, there was a couple. I mean, my theater teacher, Mr. Brooks, was very inspiring. I had two English teachers who really brought in current music for us in the class to study as poetry. That was Mr. Baxter and Mr. Warren. And then my debate teacher probably was more influential on me than anyone, Fran Berger. Just really taught me how to think critically, how to look at issues from different sides, how to research, how to think like an adult. So more than anyone, I would say Fran Berger, my debate teacher.
Have you had an opportunity to go back to your schools or to reconnect with any of those teachers and say, hey, look where I am, and thank you?
Yeah, I had not recently. I mean, Fran actually passed away a few years ago, but before that, yes, I'd gone back to my high school and thanked him. I hadn't even quite achieved the success I had, but I had been already started in television. So yeah, but recently, no, I haven't. I don't know if they're all still around, to be honest. But I do thank them wherever they are.
For the teachers out there who are listening, what skills can we be helping our students learn so that way maybe they could have a career in entertainment or edutainment, podcasting, TV? What do you hope that this generation walks out with so they can maybe intern for you one day?
I would love that. I think, really learning how to take a topic that's difficult and figuring out how to break it down. First, break it down in a way that you can understand it, and then start to think about how would I explain this to someone, not as a lesson, but like what story could I tell around this, right? So just to give you an example, today we were doing a script on swords, right? On different kinds of swords for Who Smarted, and we just recorded this episode. And there's a version of that show where you're like, there are, thrusting swords and there's stabbing swords, and the history of swords began in 18, right? But instead, our narrator on the show shows up at a museum of swords and meets this crazy guy who's giving a tour. who then takes him on a time and through a time machine that he has in the basement back into medieval times, where now they're seeing the swords. And we're doing all this on audio, but we're doing it through story, right? So we're bringing the whole thing to life by taking you, the listener, into a place where these things are happening and being used. There's funny jokes along the way. The characters, there's some tension between the characters. So that's what I would encourage people to do, is to think about, like, take a topic that seems pretty dry and figure out, how can you make it more fun? How can you put it in a context that makes it, a story rather than information?
How much of what you're working on with that in mind is unscripted? I mean, with all the different things that are going on, that, A-roll, B-roll, you got all the background noises, you got writers, you got an entire team. When you actually go to create this, is it 80% scripted and a little bit, let's see what happens? Or what is that formula? So that way, once you do say, we're going to go to the editing process, you're not missing something.
Our educational shows are 100% scripted. And the reason for that is, they're kind of, well, first of all, we put out so many of them, right? So we've done 600 plus episodes of Who Smarted in the last few years. And every single one of those is a unique world with unique characters and a unique sound design. So just on an efficiency level, to make that happen, things have to be pretty buttoned down. But the other thing is, because they're educational, right? So you can't really improvise, because they have gone through fact checking and they've gone through researching and multiple layers of writers and all of that. And so by the time you're in the booth recording it, you really have to just trust that the material on the page is not only flowing as a story, but that the material is accurate and correct. And so we don't encourage a lot of improvisation in those shows.
What happens if you're in the middle of doing these recordings and you have a great idea? Do you still stick with the script, or is there any room in your team to make that left turn and go with it?
I would say early on, we would make the left turn and go with it. What we found is that, because, just to give you a sense of like how these are done, like someone comes up with the idea, then the writer writes the script, it goes to our head writer, they work on it, goes back to the writer, then that script gets parceled out to 5 or 6 actors, none of whom no one's in the same room, right? And so it's all done remotely with people at their home studios. And so the challenge that we realized was, some actor could have a great idea and they change the line, and then they got to call the writer, and then they say, well, that actually changed this other line, so now you got to call this other actor and change and so there's this ripple effect. And it was fine early on. We were doing a few episodes, a week, but now we're it's such an ongoing, like, heavy output that we just don't have the bandwidth to do that. So we stick to the script.
That really is that stick to that script.
We stick to the script.
Get it done. Yeah. I'm curious, as you've been doing this for a little bit of time here, how has technology evolved for you? Like, what was the original genesis of this looking like? Was it pen and paper? Were you doing this on Windows, on Mac? And now we're in the world of AI.
Yeah.
How has the evolution of technology changed the way that you've been able to tell stories?
So the biggest change for us has just been the ability to work remotely. Has just gotten every year it gets better. We started this show in 2020, so the technology hasn't changed that much, other than the fact that AI exists now. But we don't use AI at all on Who Smarted. We have experimented, and of course, everyone's always like, "Let's try this, let's try that." AI could do this, but the problem with trying to use it on a show like Who Smarted is each episode of Who Smarted tackles a new topic in a new way, right? Mm. And there are some characters that are consistent in the series, but then there's new characters at every episode. And so it just doesn't really work as a storytelling machine, I guess you could call it that. And it certainly doesn't, we really like hiring actors and working with live actors for these things. We just don't see AI for us replacing that anytime soon. So maybe we use it for a little research or, brainstorming assistance, but to be honest, we haven't really embraced the AI in the production process.
What has the collaboration process looked like? I mean, you said it's only been a couple years, but Could you walk us through your workflow? You're running Google Docs, you're on Microsoft. Like what are the? Let's get a little nerdy here for a second. What does the nuts and bolts look like?
Let's go in the weeds. So we use an app called Monday.com for managing sort of high level where each show is at, each episode, and then we keep all of our scripts in Google Docs. We have a shared drive with about probably 80 people on it at this point between actors and writers. So all the scripts live in Google Docs. When the material gets recorded, each episode has a folder on Dropbox, and we use an audio software called Pro Tools for recording. And so every actor drops their piece into the episode folder, and then we have a sound engineer in Europe. Actually, he moved to Europe, but he's over there, and he first assembles everything, and then once the episodes are vocally assembled, they go to our wonderful sound mixer and sound designer, Josh, who now lives in upstate New York somewhere. And he builds the sound world and the mix and all of that. And then it goes to someone who just moved to Spain, I think. And she does the actual posting of the episode. So there's a whole workflow, but everything mostly lives in Google Docs and Dropbox.
That's amazing that it's, and again, it's the same technology that we're using in school, right? Mm-hmm. Google Docs and a lot of storytelling. And you have me thinking here, I've been doing this for 13 years, and that was well before the Spotify's came along, well before podcasting was an industry, if you will.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the best way to ask this question is, but I'm just going to throw it at you. When you're putting together a podcast at your level, and again, more than 15 million downloads. I mean, you guys are kicking it. What does a budget look like for these shows? Is this, big ticket stuff? Is this all sponsored? Is this ad rev? What does the production actually look like when it comes to dollars and cents here? Because I think for anybody who's listening to this show, myself included, we turn the microphone on, we do the best job that we can, we put the microphone away, we go back home to our family.
Yeah.
But you guys are doing this at scale with professional actors and professional people. What does that look like on the business side? I'm curious.
Yeah, so honestly, initially it looked really bad. For the first few years, we were just not making money. I mean, it was we do other, we were doing other things at the time. We have, we're a film and TV company historically, so we had all that going on. And I at one point as a CEO was like, we have to stop making Who Smarted because we're spending I think 5 figures a month on this show, and it's just and the pushback from everyone, including my business partner, and was just like, no, we're not going to stop making the show. It's the feedback from families and kids is just too huge, and it's too aligned with our mission. I was like, okay, fair enough, but then we all have to figure out how to make the show make money and all that. And so eventually the problem is that it's very hard to do advertising on shows for kids because you have to really both ethically be really careful, but also legally there's a lot of considerations. And then especially online, there's laws about, how do what you can and can't do in terms of customizing ads for kids. So about 2 years ago, this guy Jed started a family network called Starglow that was totally focused on helping really, really impactful family focused audio have ad revenue. And so we have been working with him for the last 2 years, and that's been pretty game changing in terms of helping us figure out how to actually have advertisers like, Greenlight and Squarespace and Wix and all that kind of stuff come and actually not just buy ads on the show, but come back again and again because they're seeing the results. So we do finally have some really significant ad revenue on the show. And then on the expense side, as much as possible, we try and keep things very efficient. That's one of the reasons we don't do improvisation, just because it creates a ripple effect of costs and time. So we, it's not a quote unquote inexpensive podcast, but it's probably a lot less than people think we spend on it because of the efficiencies we have. And then the other last piece of that is that the team that works on it, from the writers to the sound engineers to the actors, everyone is really passionate about Who Smarted being an impactful show for kids. It's a show that they tend to work on for understanding that the revenue isn't the same as a true crime show would be. People will work on these shows at a rate that's a little less than they might charge if they were doing like a commercial for a drug company, so all of that together has created a situation where we're able to actually be profitable with it.
And I'm curious, obviously, if you're going to be working with like a Netflix or a TV station, I would imagine this is like making a movie. You come up with an idea, you pitch it. If they want it, the thing gets green light. But we all know that on a podcast, anybody can open up a Spotify account and they're on Spotify in 6 hours. Is there a difference between, the way that we people are making podcasts and we hit the little button and it goes up on Spotify? Or did you have to pitch this idea to Spotify? Or is there a difference in all that?
It's funny because when you say like we all know that you can go make a podcast and put it on Spotify. Right. I didn't know that. Like I didn't understand. Like if you were like, just make a podcast, I'm like, how? Like what? But we had a couple of friends who make podcasts who were like, no, you just go and start your account and you do this thing. But honestly, we approach it the same way as anyone else. We just do the best we can with the resources we have. And obviously at this point, the show's become something, Who Smarted at least has become like bit of an institution, and so there's we definitely are at the higher end of premium audio for families, but we were able to do that honestly, Jeffrey, because of our experience making film and television for years. Like we just intuitively know how to do premium entertainment without we just don't make a lot of mistakes along the way. So we're not, we're able to develop pretty quickly. But as far as the difference between this and film and television, it's night and day. Like the fact that we have an idea, we can do it. We don't have to go ask permission. We don't need to wait for someone to greenlight it or give us $3 million or, it's like, we can just go make it. And so that's been incredibly liberating and fun.
What is the best advice you've ever been given as I'll say the word producer, but I know you've worn a lot of hats, but in this industry, what's the best advice you've ever been given, and by whom?
The best advice I've ever received was from an attorney. It was a friend's attorney who was looking at some documents. We were raising money for a project. This was years ago. And I was kind of stuck in this, like, is this the right document? Is the pitch correctly? Is the language right? Is all of this right? And is the budget? And we'd been going back and forth for weeks. And she finally, I know we don't curse on your show, so I won't say exactly what she said. But she said, listen, stop effing around and just go make the blanking movie. She basically was saying, just hit publish. And I was like, oh yeah, she's right. We're getting stuck in this thing that doesn't really matter. And that really stuck with me, because that's a thing that creatives, business owners, all of us, we're like, we get stuck in the stationery, and we get stuck on the website, and we get stuck on the perfect CRM or the exact right, Canva template and the colors, and is this beige right, and all of that is all you're doing is you're delaying the inevitable, which is hitting publish, right? And so I have trained myself to hit publish sooner than I probably should sometimes, but at some point you just got to put your stuff out in the world, because nobody's grading you as an adult. There's no jury out there waiting to say like, ooh, you should have messed around with this thing in Canva a little longer. Your website isn't good enough. No one cares. If your content is good and you're providing value to people, and you're providing whether that's fun or entertainment or education or all of that, that's all that matters, or something useful, providing a service. But that is the best advice I ever got, was basically just hit publish.
I love that. And I will say, no matter how many people, podcasters included, that I've asked that same question to, they all give the same answer, which is some variation of just make good content, and people will listen to it, and people will find it, and people will share it. Just make good content.
Yeah. I've had so many people say, oh, I want to start a podcast, but I don't have a microphone like yours. I was like, well, first of all, this microphone, this Yeti mic, which I think was like $80.
Mm-hmm.
This microphone, because people see me with the SM7B, which is a very expensive microphone, and it's a wonderful microphone, and that's what I use. This is what I used to do the first 60 episodes or 80 episodes of Who's Smarted during the pandemic in my closet. Like that's what I was, that's how we did it. And you know what? You go back and listen to those. I honestly, like, unless you really are thinking about it, you wouldn't know the difference. I mean, yes, the nicer microphone's better, but you're not paying attention to the microphone. You're just paying attention to the fact that it's a good story and it's fun. And so that's what I tell people. Like, you could, I don't have my phone here. Otherwise I pick up my phone. You can record using your voice memo app. The microphone on an Android phone or an iPhone is good enough that you could literally sit there, record yourself for 7 minutes at your podcast episode and upload it. And if it's good content and you're providing something interesting, no one cares.
That is the very reason why, and I don't know if you can see it in my background, but right behind me, I have my original Yeti. It's the first mic I used. I used it for the first couple of years. And honestly, I put it in the background so that way, as I'm doing these interviews and as I'm looking at you, it's always right there. It's always don't forget where you came from. And it's always it's always there. And also to echo what you just said, people are always asking, what do I need for a podcast with my kids? And I'm going, your Chromebook has a microphone. Just use it. Like, you don't need a budget. Just use what's right there. The Record app on your phone is awesome.
Listen, the Record app on your phone is better than any microphone that any radio personality used in 1955.
Yes.
Right. So, like, it's fine. Use it.
I want to flip that question on you and come at it from a different point of view. What is the best teachable moment you've ever had as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, as a teacher, or even as a parent? What's the best teachable moment you've ever had in edutainment?
Wow. That's a good question. One that I don't have an easy, obvious answer to. There's been so many. I'll tell you, when we were making Brain Games, the line producer on a TV show is the person whose job it is to make sure the show comes in on time and on budget. Nobody notices. That's actually how I started in the industry, and nobody really notices you until things are over budget or over schedule, and then all of a sudden you're very important to everybody. So on Brain Games, our line producer was looking at our scripts, and she was saying, "You guys, there's no way we can't shoot these scripts in 3 days. They're 40 pages, and we'll never get through them." And I was like, "It's fine, because we'll just cut as we go." And she said, no, I know you're not going to do that. Like, nobody ever cuts pages. And Adam, my business partner, and I were like, no, we're not those guys. Like, we literally, and she came and she was hovering over us because she was so worried that we were just going to have these like incredibly long days that were going to get her in trouble with the network and go over budget. And literally, like 8 or 9 hours in, we realized we're not going to make the day. We're not going to make our pages. And she goes, see, I told you. And we said, no, give us a minute. And so we go over there and we literally start ripping pages out of the script. Like, we don't need that, cross out this line. Like, in like 5 minutes we rejiggered everything. And she's like, oh my God, like, you guys, I believe you now. Like, I've never seen anyone do that. And I said, that's the thing, is like, if you're not precious about each detail, but you're precious about the outcome, right? About the impact. If we didn't do that, if we didn't take those pages out, we wouldn't have finished the episode. There'd be no episode. And so I think that's sort of goes hand in hand with talking about just hitting publish, is not being precious. Be whatever you are shooting, whatever you're recording, make it as good as you can with the resources you have. And that means time, money, people, equipment, all of that stuff. But if you run out of any of those things, or you are, then figure out what you need. Go back to the core and the essence of the project and make sure you get that. And everything else is just decorations on the cake, and you don't need it. And it can go away.
Do you prefer projects that are fully scripted, or do you prefer projects that are a little open-ended?
I prefer any project with great storytelling. So I don't care whether it's scripted or like we do adult podcasts that are unscripted, conversational. And those are just as much fun and just as interesting to me.
I want to ask you about a project that you have been connected to. Back in 2010, you were a producer on a little film about people who were really into Star Wars.
Jedi junkies.
What do you remember about that? And what were you thinking when you're sitting there and all those people were in metal bikinis?
So one of my good friends from NYU, one of my best friends, Mark Edlitz, he's a Jedi junkie, and he asked me to make this film with him. And I was pretty shocked, honestly. I hadn't realized like the depth of love and commitment that some Star Wars fans have to that world. And so, yeah, like the Princess Leia in the metal bikinis was just wild. I was like, wow, this is okay. I know this scene for the movie, but I didn't realize this was a whole thing. And we actually were working, we part of the documentary follows a team of people who are making a fan film. But, you know, I hear fan film and I'm thinking, you know, cardboard lightsabers and, you know, like I just didn't understand. Like we walked onto their set and I was like, this is insane. Like this is a level of filmmaking that's like borderline, you know, Hollywood. I mean, they're doing it on a fraction of the budget, but it was just really, honestly, making Jedi Junkies. I became very impressed with just the inventiveness and creativity and you know, just deep passion that a lot of people have for their favorite movies.
Do you have a favorite moment for Star Wars?
I generally just love Return of the Jedi. That's just I think that's my favorite film in the I don't have a specific moment, but I love that movie.
As we're turning the page, as 2025 is coming upon us, brand new year, lots of things ahead of us. What are you looking forward to in the next coming year?
So I'm looking forward to just really growing our podcast. I want to see them have more impact. One of the challenges is I think a lot of parents and teachers don't even know that podcasts for kids exist. Because once they find a great show they love, whether it's our shows, Who's Smarted or Mysteries About True Histories or Kid News or, you know, Wow in the World or whatever other show they find, they get hooked and they love it. And they're like, wow, this is great. Screen-free entertainment that's educational. So one of my missions for 2025 is to just grow awareness in general. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was just to let people know we're out here, you know, we're telling stories in interesting and innovative ways. And so that's a huge thing for us. And then just, you know, continuing to make great content for families.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. Where can somebody find out more information about the great work that you're doing and some of the shows that they could be sharing with their students?
Sure. The best place to go for Who's Smarted is any podcast app has it, or you can go to whosmarted.com. For teachers in particular, we know that they love to use the show in classrooms, but they don't like to have ads playing. So we offer a totally free subscription to Who's Smarted Plus for all educators. And that they can get that at whosmarted.com. If they click educators, they get an instant free subscription to the ad-free version. And then the other show, Mysteries About True Histories, also just search it up in any podcast app and you'll find it.
Certainly going to make sure that we have links to all of that over on our shows. You can find more information about this and other episodes over on teachercast.net/podcast. Talking today to the great and legendary Jerry Colbert. Jerry, I want to say thank you for coming on. Please make this our first episode. Would love to have you and your team on to talk more about these great things. I'll give you the last word to anybody that's out there listening, especially around the holiday season. What's the one piece of advice that you have to say to teachers and parents this time of year?
Be patient with your kids. You're going to be around them a lot. So be patient, have fun, you know, look for opportunities to go down rabbit holes that inspire curiosity, but most importantly, have fun, be present with your family and friends, and have a great holiday season.
Jerry, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today.
Thank you, Jeffrey. This is awesome.
And that wraps up this episode of the Jeff Bradbury Show. On behalf of Jerry and everybody here on the TeacherCast Educational Network, my name is Jeff Bradbury, reminding you guys to keep up the great work in your classrooms and continue sharing your passions with your students.